until 1973. In a tribute to Borges, Mario Vargas Llosa wrote, "His is a world of clear, pure, and at the same time unusual ideas, expressed in words of great directness and restraint. He was a superb storyteller. One reads most of Borges's tales with the hypnotic interest usually reserved for reading detective fiction." Andrew Hurley is professor of English at the University of Puerto Rico in San Juan, where he also teaches in the translation program. He has translated Reinaldo Arenas's Pentagony novels, as well as works by Fernando Arrabal, Ernesto Sábato, Gustavo Sáenz, and most recently, the Puerto Rican authors Edgardo Rodríguez Juliá, Ana Livia Vega, and Antonio Martorell. Introduction by Andrew Hurley. It should hardly be surprising that as Borges, born in 1899, entered his 70s, he found it harder to maintain the rhythm of production that he had kept up in his earlier years. In point of fact, though, it was no lack of invention or creativity that slowed him down, but rather circumstances. First, perhaps, were the physical obstacles of old age. By now, not only was he growing somewhat frail, but he was totally blind, and he had to depend on dictation for both his writing and the meticulous revisions that he was famed for. But of course, Borges had been dictating for years. What other circumstances were taking their toll? For one thing, he was traveling constantly during the early 70s, both enjoying and hounded by the international fame, in some quarters almost worship, that had come to him rather belatedly. For another, his mother, Leonor Acevedo, now in her 90s, fell very ill. She had been quite frail for years and had hardly left the house. Borges had been obliged to find companions and caretakers for her, not to mention companions and amanuenses for himself, now that his mother could no longer assist him. But then, in 1971, Leonor fell prey to a long, agonizing, and heart-wrenching illness. Though totally bedridden by 1973, she did not die until 1975, screaming in pain. The security of all that had been home and safe routine was thus crumbling for Borges in the early 70s, and yet somehow, with all the physical and emotional burdens of this period, Borges still managed to produce 3 remarkable books of fiction in the last years of his life: Brodie's Report, published in 1970, and the 2 included here, The Book of Sand, 1975, and Shakespeare's Memory, 1983. One calls them remarkable, but unfortunately, as is sometimes done with a writer's juvenilia, these late volumes have frequently been treated almost as geriatrica, dismissed by critics nostalgic for the good old days, as not up to the high standards of the early work, as exhibiting a lamentable falling off of imagination, though those critics never, it should be noted, talk about a falling off of craft. Yet sometimes one wonders whether those commentators are reading the same stories that one is reading, because enough of the stories to tip any critic's scale. One would think the other, The Night of the Gifts, The Book of Sand, Blue Tigers, Shakespeare's Memory, and probably 3 more in Brodie's Report are surely as haunting and provocative and well wrought as anything Borges ever wrote. In fact, one might go even further, if, as those nostalgic critics claim, these are an old man.